Hello. Greetings, Earthlings. It's a pleasure to see you today, folks. My name is Dustin Cormier, and this is another episode of How to Rock Astrology. Real pleasure to be hanging out with you folks today. If anybody could do me a favor and let me know if y'all can hear me. I've been having some funky situations with my microphone, but I can hear me okay. Let me know if I am not making any noise. That would be a bummer. For everybody watching, this is a live stream, and today we are going to be discussing the Age of Aquarius Debunked. Of course, this is a short way of saying a bigger, real essence of this video. Thank you, my friend Cool Calflow. I'm glad that you can hear me. And thanks for hanging out. Sweet. Thanks, Porter. Okay, folks. So today's really, I have an intention to get through to this Age of Aquarius debunked thing. Excuse me. Really, what is happening here is that we are going to be discussing a very important issue in the astrology world. As a Vedic-minded astrologer, this has been an issue that I have been very aware of for a long time, because when I first got into Vedic, I thought that I had to bring the signs back 23 degrees. I learned eventually that tropical and Vedic are not the same thing. I've talked about this already in one of my other videos. You can be a tropical Vedic astrologer, or you can be a sidereal Vedic astrologer. You can also be a tropical Western astrologer or a sidereal Western astrologer. Tropical and sidereal are a matter of measurement. Vedic and Western are a matter of system interpretation, chart interpretation. And so this is a very important issue for a lot of people who are wondering what this is all about. And for a long time, I just abided by the teachers that I trusted as seeming to have the grasp on things. Guys like Victor Kara, Ernst Wilhelm, RYAN KURCZAK'S, and the rest of the tropical Vedic crew that's happening on the internet world right now. Hello, everybody. Nice to see Catherine, Anonymous Ola, and Cool Calflow. Thanks for hanging out here, folks. So, today we're setting the record straight, folks. We're getting it all out there for all to see. Why is it that I am so interested in particularly having this attitude of really sticking to strictly tropical and really not riding by the sidereal wavelength of things? Porter is asking if my signs are different in the two systems. In tropical, I'm a Scorpio, Sun, Leo rising, Sagittarius moon. And in sidereal, all of those are back one sign. I'm a Cancer rising, Libra sun, Scorpio moon. But, as we're going to discuss, I hardly ever really mention my sidereal placements, because I am not only not a sidereal astrologer, but I'm someone who contends that tropical is really the way to go. And that is what we're talking about in today's video. So I hope you guys enjoy this. This will be the first video in a series of videos. I plan on talking about this a little bit more. Stay tuned this coming Tuesday night. I'm going to be talking with Victor Kara about this sidereal tropical issue. And so today is really all about the tropical sidereal debate. I just happen to be keying it for, my Western audience really ought to hear all this stuff in a huge way, because, as I often say, as a tropical Vedic person, there's something that both teams need to hear by the synthesis of the two. The Vedic people are commonly sidereal astrologers, and they should just get on the tropical train, in my opinion. But even tropical astrologers don't fully understand the fundamentals of the system that they themselves use, and this has led to the Age of Aquarius thing. I believe there are ages, and we're going to talk about how they relate to Pluto's nodes. That's an evolutionary astrology idea. But however you dice it or slice it, we're going to explain today why the idea of the Age of Aquarius as being related to the precession of the equinox is what I would call a farce. It's something that is due to an idea that's created due to misunderstanding on this important issue. So that is my idea here, folks. Now, someone's asking about crazy tropical. I have heard of it. I don't know too much about it, and so I'm not going to talk about it here in this video. But eventually I'm going to learn about it and go through the guts of that too. So I've got notes, meticulous notes, and I'm going to be going between my notes as well as notes in my notebook. We have a musical interlude today, ladies and gentlemen. It's not going to be anything too crazy, but it's going to be bringing in some of our session today, as we shall see. Now, to begin, I want everyone to know that my interest here is to play the part of a well-reasoned debater in this hotly debated topic where we, Team Tropical, will fully convey our position without holding back, if only in the interest of academic integrity. I don't speak for all tropical Vedic astrologers here, and I don't even speak for all tropical astrologers. I'm only bringing my own understanding of this debate to this public forum in the interest of being Sagittarius moon and saying, here's what I think, despite what might happen from there. There's a lot to get into on this subject, and so this video can only be a primer on the subject. With this whole video, it's really my intro into this world. And I'm going to try to, it goes deep. We have to get into history in order to really unplug and unveil why this debate is happening today. And we're going to get into a bit of the history today. Then when we hang out with Vic Dakara on Tuesday night, we're going to go a little bit more into some history. And I plan on doing another video that goes into more detail. So for now, this is the primer. For everybody who's interested, I'm not going to get anything too advanced here, although there's some astronomy that we got to deal with. Now, that's why I say that this video is not only for people interested in Vedic astrology, but it's also for my Western users. Because with this video, I'm debunking the Age of Aquarius theory. So, one reason I'm doing this video is because, like me, the majority of people interested in astrology tend to use data software like Astrodienst or Cafe Astrology or what have you, and have never really touched an ephemeris or a telescope. These are the classical ways of building a chart. Neither have I. And if that's you, don't worry. You don't have to create a chart from scratch in order to to enjoy astrology or this video. Let this video be an overview to catch you up on some fundamentals, which I have to give the caveat that I still am not an expert on building a chart from scratch, but I have been going back and forth with Vic Dakara through email. I'm very blessed that he exists and he gives me the time of day. I've been chasing his tail for a long time, and on this issue, he gets fired up about once every 2 years. He was fired up about it. I sent him some emails, and he combed through a lot of my misunderstandings and misgivings about it. And I still got a lot to learn. But hopefully this video at least conveys some important information. So, of course, you guys know with me, I've got visuals. I've got all the things that are at least going to get us all on an understanding of what this debate is really all about. And it's a live stream. So feel free to ask any questions. There's a lot of questions that I'm sure are going to come through. I'm going to make the space for discussions about things, but I'm pretty fairly certain that most of the questions that might be asked here are probably going to be covered in this video, in which case I'll probably just say that. For example, our friend Harris Khan has asked, is tropical astrology even valid because it's based on seasons? This is something that we're going to be discussing. So there's a lot here, and I've got it chromatically. I got a flow here. So if you ask a question that relates to the part of the flow that we're in, I'll usually answer it. If not, it probably means that I'm going to be answering it at some point. So let's see how that goes. But thanks for asking your question, Harris Khan. Anonymy Ola has asked, how old am I? I'm born 1991. So I'm turning how old am I? I think I'm turning 31. For some reason, that's not coming to me. What year are we in? It's 2023. I think I'm turning 32. Yeah. Wow. Time's flying. I'm turning 32 in November. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between, let's get into this issue on this subject. What we shall do, let's first start with the basic dynamics of what exactly defines the differences between a sidereal and a tropical astrology, a sidereal and a tropical zodiac. Oh, I'm so sorry. I just realized, Harris Khan, thank you for correcting me. Anonymy Ola asked, how am I? Not how old am I? I'm doing great, Anonymy. Thanks for asking. Sorry about that. I'm going to try to actually use my eyes instead of vaguely using them. Cool. Anonymy says that they are 41 today. Okay. Thank you very much for being here with me, folks. Let's start rolling here with our subject. We're going to talk about what exactly defines the difference between a sidereal and a tropical-based astrology. It seems to be obvious to most people really what constitutes the idea of sidereal astrology. This is the idea most people in the Western Hemisphere actually assume is how things work, because it seems to make sense at first glance. It's what we all thought it was all about. Astrologers are all about the stars. That's what people tend to think. Everyone assumes astrologers are all about the stars. But we in the tropical tradition are actually really more into the motions of the planets as keepers of time in the soul, in the background of the solar calendar of the year. So in a way, we can say it relates to seasons, but that's not exactly the right way to put it. The year is what really creates the tropical astrologers' backdrop of time. Tropical astrology tends to be more concerned with time, whereas sidereal astrology, sidereal of the stars, is more concerned with space. Now, tropical Vedic astrologers use both. They use what's called the Nakshatras, which are the stars, but the tropical zodiac is something that spins within the fixed stars. And we're going to get that. Now, let's start with the Sidereal Zodiac, because this is something that people seem to, again, it just seems like what's happening to everybody, okay? The word sidereal is an outdated French term. I was supposed to have pictures for this, but I guess I don't. The sidereal is an outdated French term. It's got roots with the Latin word sidus, or sider, S-I-D-E-R. And this means the stars. Sider means the S-I-D-E-R is the stars in Latin. Many people have made incorrect assumptions that the archetypal energy of the zodiac signs are contained in the stars. as if the planets are like these filters, or maybe a better word is transistors, which receive energy from the starry constellations as they shine through the planets towards the Earth. It's as if there's this pervading image of like an imaginary cylindrical well where the light of the planets is filtered through, almost like the stained glass of a church. And this stained glass is supposed to be the archetypal energy of the suns, right? This is how everybody understands. Even people in the tropical Western sphere will be, this seems to make sense, doesn't it? And especially those of us in the Newtonian, mechanical Western world will always try to put it, most scientific-minded people will try to explain it this way. I remember when I first started with astrology, and my friends thought I was weird, I would try to say, okay, so the water gets affected by the moon. And if the water can get affected by the moon on planet Earth, why can't what's happening in the stars, with the planets, affect the vibrations on Earth? And that is, that's true. But I would always include that with this idea that the planets are circling the sun, and that the stars are like the true holders of the energy, and that the planets are absorbing, like a transistor, the energy of the star that goes through the sun towards the Earth, or through any of the other planets towards the Earth. And this is how most people understand it to be. Now, this idea is not how it's always been thought about. This is absurd to the Vedic ideology because of how Vedic astrologers understand it, is that the jyoti, the light of our galaxy, actually, the light of our galaxy, which is the microcosm of the macrocosm of our soul. I should say it vice versa. The light of our galaxy is the macrocosm to the microcosm of the soul. There's a quantum reflection happening there. And this comes from the sun at the center of the galaxy beaming outward. The light of those planets and their progression reflects the light in the microcosm of our soul's evolution. The light of the planets moving around the sun, from Earth's perspective, is a reflection of the microcosm of our soul. This is the esoteric and, really a more deeply Vedic take on how all this is happening. The jyotish is the word for astrology, and jyoti is the Sanskrit word for light. So jyotish is the science of the light in this sort of more spiritual sense. Now, when astrologers try to scientifically explain things through this cylindrical well, if you follow the logic there, you eventually realize you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because astrology is really more like non-linear and quantum, as I like to say. Now, don't let me lose you here, folks, because this doesn't mean that astrology is not something that can be understood through some kind of verified scientific manner. But really, the essence of tropical astrology, as we use it as tropical astrologers, it's not what I just described. It's not planets acting as transistors for the energy of the stars beaming towards us. The sun is what lights up the planets, and that's what we see from Earth. So, don't let me lose you yet, folks, because we're going to go through a lot of phases of these ideas, and then we got to go into more in order to show the nature of these ideas. Now, one thing that confuses people, we've already had somebody, Harris Khan has already mentioned something. Harris Khan asked about is tropical astrology bogus because it goes by the seasons? A lot of people say that they're rather confused at the fact that we can't really see any points in the sky that define the tropical zodiac per se. There's no points in the sky that show what makes the tropical zodiac. Okay? Thankfully, we have people like Victakara pointing to texts like the Bhagavad Purana to kind of clarify how we as tropical astrologers actually work. And us in the Western tradition, we're using tropical Vedic astrology in this way. It's true that there's no observable object or marker in the stars that clearly demarcates the points upon which the zodiac is supposed to be based. That is true. This is a little picture here that I kind of want to show here. It's kind of not the best graphic, but we can see that the Earth, it's a geomantic science, and we've got the zodiac signs all around it, and the sun is here doing its traveling thing. It's almost like a geomantic way of understanding astrology. And we're going to talk more about that as we go along. Now, this doesn't mean that the tropical zodiac or the observable facts about tropical astrology and the zodiac don't exist. We've already mentioned something that's a key marker for it, and this is the length of the days. We can see the days getting shorter after the summer solstice, and we can see the days getting longer after the winter solstice. So we can see and observe from the Earth the calendar points during the year which define the tropical zodiac, even though there's no star that signifies them. If we try to use a star to signify something, we're going to make the mistake that has caused people nowadays to believe in sidereal astrology. So there's no, according to the tropical theory, there is no star that aligns that shows Aries, because Aries has to do with the onset of spring. And we're going to talk about that. Now, there was a time before the advent of modern calculation softwares, like we use Astrodienst, we use Cafe Astrology, whatever. Before the advent of these calculation softwares, people were forced to use stars as a reference point, like a map. But the dance of the Earth and the Sun, which actually creates our yearly solstices, which in the solstices and equinoxes, create the cardinal points, Aries, Libra, Cancer, and Capricorn. This is the dance of the Earth and the Sun. The dancing of the Earth and the Sun has shifted places against the backdrop of the star map that we used 2,000 years ago. So now that old map is obsolete. It's almost as if the Sun and Earth are dancing, and for a little while they said, okay, we're going to do this type of dance where we come over here, and then we come over here, and then we come over here. So let's stay about 5 paces away from that pillar there. And they did it about 5 times. But as they moved, they got more paces away from that pillar there on their feet. Their feet were walking, and they said, you know what? Let's just forget being 5 paces from that pillar. Let's forget the point that we marked down on the ground, because our dance is what's really happening here. I'm going to be thinking of all sorts of silly metaphors like that. So this is what I mean when I say the zodiac is a phenomenon of the calendar more than of space or the stars. And this is what we tropical astrologers practice without realizing it. Now, let's bring this down to earth here, folks, okay? Because I'm sure there are plenty of tropical astrologers that are still scratching their head a little bit at what we're talking about here, okay? So, think about it. When you input birth data into a software like Cafe Astrology or Astrodienst, and I'm gonna do that. We've got Astrodienst, we're gonna bring it up, okay? Imagine you put a birth date for March 21st. Think about it, folks. Does everybody know what March 21st is? March 21st is the day of the Vernal Equinox. That's the point during the year when it's the first day of spring. What defines the first day of spring? It's the calendar, but what defines the calendar? What defines the calendar that we use is that the first day of spring, March 21st, is when the days and nights have equal length. We just got out of winter. The winter solstice happens December 21st. That's when the days are the shortest. After December 21st, after Christmas, the sun is risen. Well, that's more of an Easter thing. The sun is born and comes up and begins to rise. And the sun essentially rises from where it was so that it can be seen again. And the days get progressively longer. In fact, when you think about it, December 21st is the winter solstice. March 21st is 4 months later. That's the first day of spring. That's when the days and nights are equal. Then we have July 21st. July 21st is the summer solstice. That's Cancer. That's 4 months from March. These are how the cardinal points are made, right? So let's get back to our example with the vernal equinox. The first day of spring is March 21st. Now, what would you say that is in an astrology chart? When it is March 21st, the sun is at 0 degrees of Aries, isn't it? Most people have heard this before. The ram of spring comes because it is halfway through the journey from the winter solstice to the summer solstice. So most beginner astrologers hear this and they assume the first day of spring in the calendar is going to line up with the so-called constellation Aries. And you'd think it would, but it doesn't. Okay? Now, follow me here, folks. All right? We're going to go. Just make sure. Yeah. Okay. Now, this is Astrodienst. It's a great little free astrology software that they have. Let's look at the day that we're building here. We're talking about a male. The birthday is the 21st of March, 1993. Arbitrary year. Let's say they're born at noon, and let's say they're born in Toronto. Continue. The rising sign is going to be whatever it is, but what we're looking for is the sun sign. The sun, as we can see here, I wish I could zoom in on this more. The sun sign is in Aries, and it's 1 degree of Aries. So this is kind of a give or take thing, but ultimately we can see that the 0 point of Aries for a tropical astrologer, right? We're tropical astrologers, folks. That's what Astrodienst is. If you look it up on Cafe Astrology, any tropical software, you look up March 21st, the sun is going to be at 1 degree of Aries. Always, every time. Right? So this all makes sense. Doesn't seem to be a problem here, right? For us astrologers, because we are all used to using this software, it makes simple enough sense that March 21st, the first day of spring, is going to be the 1st degree of Aries. Now, if you looked up a birth chart of somebody born at March 21st today on a sidereal software, using the Sidereal Zodiac, the star-based zodiac, the sun is not going to be at 0 degrees Aries. It's going to be at 6 degrees of Pisces. In fact, it's going to be nowhere near the stars anciently associated with Aries in the sky. Okay? So you look up in the sky, anciently, there's been this star pattern called Aries, right? So why doesn't the first day of spring in the tropical line up with the first degree of the star of Aries? Now we're going to look up. We've just looked up our tropical chart on Astrodienst. Now we're going to go to a chart that is a Vedic chart that uses what's called the Lahiri Ayanamsha. That's essentially, this is a sidereal chart. Okay? This is a star-based chart. The name is whatever The date, same date, March 21st, 1993 at noon in Canada, in Toronto. I'm going to continue. Now what we see here, those of you who are Westerners might not recognize this type of chart, but essentially these squares are the zodiac. The corner pieces are the mutable signs. So Aries is up here at the top, and the right next to it is Taurus. There's nothing in Aries. What we see is that the sun, remember this is March 21st in a sidereal chart, the sun is at 7 degrees of Pisces in this corner pocket. Therefore, the sun at March 21st is actually nowhere near the ancient star, the star grouping called Aries, which people once looked in the sky and said, you know what, that looks like a ram. And when you look at star maps of so many different things, that people have this idea of Aries. The sun at March 21st is nowhere near that star grouping. So this is the debate fleshed out. Which one's correct, right? What exactly gives here? So why doesn't the first day of spring line up with what is anciently called the constellation of Aries in the stars? I'll tell you, it once did. 2,000 years ago. This is the nature of the cognitive dissonance that's happening, is that the sun has progressed through what's called the precession of the equinox. We're going to get there, folks. So then we ask, what is this so-called constellation Aries in the sidereal chart? When we have always said that there's a star grouping called Aries, what is making that up? Who decided that that was going to be a thing? This might sound familiar to you. Some people use this as an argument given to disprove astrology on the whole. The precession of the equinox is to blame, as we'll explain. And as tropical astrologers, this is not a problem for us because, as I said, we don't use the stars. We use the first day of spring. Right? Essentially, tropical astrologers follow the point where the sun was during the equinox. And this point, which creates the astrology chart, really how it is that wherever the sun is, it almost doesn't even matter in an astrology chart. The point where the sun is in the sky at the first day of spring, that's what we call the vernal equinox point. We call that cosmic east in tropical astrology. Now, let's say Saturn is 180 degrees from that point. It's in Libra. It's at 0 degrees Libra. That's how we know where Saturn is in the tropical astrology chart. Has nothing to do with Saturn being close to Aldebaran or some star out there that relates to one of the star groupings. Has to do with the fact that Saturn is opposite cosmic east, the vernal equinox point. So this is how tropical astrologers actually make a chart. Now, the point where the sun is in relation to the earth during the first day of spring in our calendar, where the sun is in the sky, in the backdrop of the stars, this has moved against the background of the stars over a period of 2,000 years. So 2,000 years ago, you got to understand, people, that we're going to explain this, okay? Because back then, people didn't have astrology softwares. So they were looking at planets in the sky, and they didn't have the knowledge that we're talking about right now. We take it for granted that we look up and we just know that we look up a date in a software and that the sun is going to be here and that it's all going to work in the tropical way. But back in the day, it was very hard for people to make a chart. The stars, at some point, people needed to use the stars in order to plot where the planets are. Because think about it. You can only see the planets for half the day because the sun skews the planets for half the day. We use software, so we don't think about this kind of stuff. I didn't either until I started to talk with Vic Takara about it. Half the day is gone in any day. You can only study astrology at night. And what happens if you're only looking at half the sky? So what if you've got planets on the other half of the Earth? You won't be able to see them for that half of the year. Now, what about Venus and Mercury? It would be very difficult to plot Venus and Mercury because they're always close to the sun, which means when the sun rises, it's going to be very rare that you're going to be able to really plot Venus and Mercury. Mars is the same way. Mars does, it takes 2 years for Mars to go back to the same point in the zodiac. And the Mars is going with the sun's movement. So when the sun is conjunct Mars, it's like invisible to astrologers for like a long time before it strays from the sun and becomes opposite the sun, and we could see it in the night sky. So this is just stuff to give you a bit of grounding on what early astrologers had to do in order to practice astrology. So what exactly did they do? Well, there was a point when really the most difficult thing was that they didn't know the nature of the driver of the planet's motions. It was once they discovered the planet's motions that they could guess where the planets are, even though the sun blinded it halfway throughout the day. This was a painstaking process that we're going to kind of discuss in a bit more detail. But essentially, it's like bird watchers. Bird watchers, they sit outside their window and they notice year after year, oh, there's the warblers. The warblers are coming in. They're nesting in the fir trees. They hang out there for 3 months, and then they go off to another spot. And then they call their buddies and say, hey, I'm in Pennsylvania. The warblers just came and rested in my fir trees. Now they're probably going to be making your way in about a few weeks up there in Toronto, Canada, and they're going to probably stay there for the spring. And then the people in Toronto, Canada said, yep. Call up the people in Pennsylvania. Yeah, the warblers are here. You were right. And over time, these bird watchers, meticulously year after year, have defined the path of the warbler, of the bird. This is the same thing for when early astrologers were trying to mark the paths of the planets. Vic Takara kind of has explained to me that, I think we should pretty much start getting into this. Essentially, how it would have worked all that time ago is that it would be kind of like, this is really a math thing, and this is how Vic Takara explained it to me. If a car, and we're talking about the motions of the planets. We couldn't do astrology, the whole planet couldn't do astrology until we developed an ephemeris. This is the nature of the ephemeris that people talk about. Again, it's a word you hear that you think is like probably important until it hits you like this, the way Vic Takara described it to me, okay? Because back in the day, people couldn't really, they couldn't do astrology unless they knew about the planet's movements. So this is why in the Vedic tradition, before we ever had tropical astrology, before we ever had zodiac astrology, we had what was called the Nakshatras. The Nakshatras and the stars are a science, and they do have importance, but it has nothing to do with the zodiac. You have to understand that they're two completely different things. There's the star wheel, and then there's what I'm talking about as the progression of planets from cosmic east, which is the vernal equinox point. But the stars are their own thing. The Vedic people used to observe the sun and the moon's movements through the nakshatras. The nakshatras were defined as 27 stars, 27 or 28, depending on which tradition you're looking at and what method you're using and what you're trying to do with this nakshatra reading. there was 27 or 28 of them, basically, because it takes the moon 27 or 28 nights to meet up with the sun again. The moon meets the sun, and it dissolves in the sun, and then it goes and meets its 27 wives all throughout the zodiac. And really, each day, it's going to get a different thing out of each of those star spaces. So before we ever had the zodiac, before we had Aries, Taurus, Gemini, before we even had really dealing with the planets, it was mostly an astrology that dealt with the sun and the moon in the backdrop of the Nakshatras. This is partly because people had no idea how to plot the planets. It was a very difficult thing, as we've been kind of talking about. And this is how Vic Takara describes it. Really, when astrology started to actually take a grip and the tropical zodiac became a thing, it's when people started to map planetary movements like these bird watchers through an ephemeris. Now, think about this, okay? There was a time where people had the intention and understanding of astrology. Where it came from is a psychedelic thought. Some people say it came from times like Atlantis. It was just some memory in the human condition that just had this feeling of astrology being a thing. Some say, I often like to say, that there were rishis for whom the cosmos of astrology and the planets outside themselves reflected their inner cosmos. Just like there's a Mars outside, there's also a Mars inside. Just like there's a Jupiter outside, there's also a Jupiter inside. These ancient sages looked at this within themselves and said, this is where Jupiter is right now. Because they were super psychic and sensitive and clairvoyant. This is where Jupiter is in the zodiac of my soul. And that was happening for a long time before people started developing simple little eyeglasses or just things where they could see it in the sky. And they would say, oh, this is what the Master Rishi said. Saturn is opposite the equinox point right now. Saturn must be in Libra. They correlated externally with what they felt internally. This is where astrology has its psychedelic underpinnings. So, when people started, people say that there was ancient ages where these clairvoyants understood these things naturally, and their followers were not in the same level of clairvoyance. Not everybody can be a sage or a rishi. So they would write. The rishis would either write or they would chant, more particularly. If we're talking 6,000 years ago, whatever. They were chanting about their ideas of the zodiac, etc. Really, again, the zodiac didn't show up until actually 700 BC. 500 BC is when they started coming through. There are depictions of Taurus and the bull horns from 4,000 years ago, but it wasn't necessarily a zodiac horoscope astrology. It's more sky reading for omens. It's what people were doing before the zodiac. It was really only 500 BC, after Alexander the Great, where the whole world began to settle after the wars of Alexander the Great. A bunch of cultures came together, shared their ideas about the stars, and together, all these cultures synthesized the idea of a personal horoscope. Not just omen reading in the sky for what's going to happen to us collectively, but you were born when the sun was in Taurus and Mars was trine the sun, and it means something to your soul going forward. That's personal horoscopy. That didn't happen until 500 BC. Right? So, once everybody started to get the idea that this astrology thing is a thing, it was for a long time, they didn't know exactly how to do it. They heard whispers from the rishis that the planets could be marked in order to show the progression of the soul. So how would people have instinctively done it? Well, it was probably, think about it, back in the day, okay? 500 BC, you were lucky if it was the time of year where you could see Saturn out in the sky. And what they would do is they would oftentimes, the tropical astrology star map was built around this time. Let's say 2,000 years ago is when it kind of started to get finalized. And the smartest people knew that it was a tropical zodiac. Really, the most wise created even Sidereal Aries at this time was put to the Vernal Equinox. Because we know 2,000 years ago, remember I showed you the chart and it said that if you put in March 21st in a sidereal chart, it shows 7 degrees of Pisces. 2,000 years ago, that would have actually lined up with 0 degrees Aries with the vernal equinox. We're going to get there as we go along. There's lots of interplays to be done here, folks. But and these early people were trying to figure out how to do the zodiac. They realized that the sun is at its point during the equinox. Now, how do they decide how far a planet has gone in the zodiac? There's different ways they thought they could have done it. You know, at first they kind of thought of it this way, okay? It takes the sun it takes the earth 365 years to revolve around the sun. Excuse me, 365 days. It takes the earth 365 days to revolve around the sun, right? So, what they thought, let's say for example with Saturn, it takes Saturn 27 years to travel around the zodiac. And this is something they would have noticed. The last time Saturn was here in Libra was 27 years ago. Now it's back here again. We've confirmed this from the bird watchers before us, who said that this is where the bird is now. It has come to nest. Saturn has come to its place in Libra like it was 27 years ago. So what they kind of thought, you know, especially when it's a time during, you know, let's say the sun, let's say it's September. That means during the day, you're not going to see Saturn in the sky because the sun is around Virgo. So Virgo is right next door to Libra. So you're hardly ever going to see Saturn in the sky around that time. So what did they do? They tried to do it as a matter of like fractions. You know, they didn't do this, but I'm trying to show us why. Okay. So they said Saturn takes 27 years to travel the zodiac. That's 9,855 days. So let's say Saturn is at 15 degrees of Libra. It has traveled about 4% of the tropical zodiac from 0 degrees Libra. Right? Because when you think about it, 15 degrees of the 360 circle is 4%. Around there. Right? So they thought, okay, Saturn has traveled 4% of the zodiac. But they could have thought that. But it doesn't work that way. I'm trying to show you guys, like, we're trying to get into the mindset of how we would have done astrology at the time. The thing is that Saturn doesn't have an exact trajectory. It has an oval orbit, and it has retrogrades. So it's not that easy to calculate. You couldn't just calculate it as like percents in this way. I'm going to check my live chat because it looks like it might have gotten frozen. Yep, I'm good. So this is how Vedic Astrologers described it to me. The thing is that what really got astrology started was having an ephemeris, is understanding the motions of the planets. And this is something that would have been tracked, again, like the bird watchers watching the warblers. And this is what Vedic Astrologers says. And this is how he explained it to me. If a car is going 60 kilometers per hour, one way, and it just travels for 1 hour, then it's very easy to know it will be exactly 60 kilometers from wherever it started after 1 hour of driving. So we'll know that it drove 60 kilometers. If it drives straight for 1 hour, it's 60 kilometers an hour. But what if the driver accelerates and decelerates a lot? and by huge amounts. And sometimes it even turns around and goes backwards, retrograde. How will you figure it out? How will you figure out where it is after 1 hour of driving? This is the issue for early astrologers. They couldn't just say that Saturn has progressed, that Saturn is going to progress in a steady amount over the 27 years, because it's going to go retrograde. It's got an oval orbit, which means certain parts of the year it's going faster and slower, right? These are all things that they had to account for. This is why early astrologers instinctively said, you know what, screw this. Let's just observe it in the night sky. Even if we can only see Saturn half the year, we can plot its movements. You know, so what the early astrologers did was they would say, okay, let's just say that Saturn is at the star Aldebaran. And we know that Aldebaran is this far from Aries, from cosmic east. So if Aldebaran is this many degrees from Aries, then we know that Saturn has progressed that far in the zodiac, in the soul, at this time of the year. Now, over time, plotting the motions of the planets in an ephemeris was the invention that caused astrology as we know it to explode as a practice 2,000 years ago. And this is a very key point, ladies and gentlemen. I know that we're going through a lot here, and I will thank you all for your patience. But we have to understand that this is a very important aspect of things. It was that once the bird watchers, for centuries upon centuries upon centuries, would watch half the night sky, see, oh, Mars is here, and, you know, you could only see it, like it was this very clippy vision of the planets that they could only see at certain key times because the sun was blinding the sky for half the day. And the half the sky that it was blinding, the sun, you know, if it's in Aries, it's blinding from basically, you know, a huge chunk of the zodiac until it goes down. It's basically blinding, you know, Capricorn to Cancer. You can't really do much astrology for anything before Capricorn and anything past Cancer. Then when Aries was in Libra, it was blinding the other half of the sky. And it was blinding half of the sky for half the day every day. So it was when the bird watchers plotted down the planetary movements in an ephemeris, century after century after century, they said, we've got it. After about 500 years, like that's a lot of time to plot these warblers. They had it down about 500 years. So astrology having started around 500 BC, it was in around 0 AD, 100 AD, 200 AD, that books like the Surya Siddhanta started being written. That books like authors like Varamahira, the Greek authors of the Zodiac, started to solidify and crystallize what they were trying to do. And this is an important point, ladies and gentlemen, because as we're going to explain, it was at this time that people got astrology and they said, okay, so we understand the motions of the planets, and all we have to do, we know that Mars has a certain trajectory, and it's going to go retrograde here, but it's going to go, and then it's going to go retrograde here, and then it's going to go. We've got it down now. So now all we have to do is memorize where the vernal equinox is. Because if we've memorized where the vernal equinox is, we know where cosmic east is, so that when Mars is in Scorpio, we know it's at this star. And this star, let's say it was probably Jesta at the time, I believe. So Mars is in Scorpio, it's at the star of Jesta. We know Jesta is this far from the vernal equinox at the time. So we don't even need to plot where Mars has progressed from the vernal equinox point. We just know that Jesta is this far from the vernal equinox. And they memorized that point, and they fixed it to the stars. This is the issue they forgot that it was supposed to be a temporary picture that they took there. Burn that in your brain, folks, because it's going to be important for us later. So, astrology as we know it began to explode once they developed an ephemeris that showed the motions of the planets. Plotting these drivers of these wacky cars, called the planets, was something that had to be done gradually over centuries, not unlike these bird watchers. That's the ephemeris. That is what made tropical astrology and all astrology possible, as we've explained why. Because of the nights being, you can only see it for half the night, and then the sun would rise. You only see half of the zodiac for every half the year that you're in. Now, this is what we want to understand here as tropical astrologers. It's the distance of a planet from the sun's position at the spring equinox, which is a calendar phenomenon. It has nothing to do with the stars. It's a planet's distance from cosmic east at the spring equinox. And we know that point because that's where the sun is when the days and nights are equal. That is how we know. That is how we mark the zodiac. It's the lengths of the day. It has nothing to do with observations. It has nothing to do even with the seasons, technically. It has to do with the calendar of the year. This makes up the planet's position in the zodiac. My cat just walked in. I thought I protected my bounds. It's okay, he's chilling. So everybody, this is the nature of tropical astrology, is that it has everything to do with the distance of a planet from the vernal equinox point. It has nothing to do with the stars. It's time for our musical interlude. Everybody, just give me a moment. Don't worry, you don't have to sing. I don't have any words prepared anyway. Nothing other than the simplest words that most people should know from Mary Poppins. I'm going to try and show everybody here. I haven't had my guitar out in a video since I was doing How to Rock a Campfire. Now, I'm going to make short thrift of this, folks. Okay? This is how tropical astrology works. Everybody knows the major scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That is a universal pattern. You can play. That's called the major scale. Okay? Now, musicians understand that there's a difference between tones and there's a difference between notes. A note is a note that follows... Sorry, I can tell my computer's getting a little bit skippy, and this is an important part. A note follows a progression. So we've got do, re, mi, fa. These are all notes. They are tones, but the note, the fa, is the fourth note in the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, it's the distance between do and fa, do, fa, that makes fa what it is. Do, fa. Do is like the equinox. You can follow this pattern from any pitch, like any star, but fa will always be a set distance from do. Do, re, mi, fa. Do, re, mi, fa. Sorry. Do, re, mi, fa. Do, re, mi, fa. Do, fa. Do, fa. Because fa is always a set distance from do. So you can start the do on any part of the guitar. Do, re, mi, fa. Do, re, mi, fa. But it'll always be the same scale, the same melody. Likewise, Gemini is not fixed to a pitch. It's not fixed to a certain note. Because a scale is a different thing. The scale in a note in a scale, is a different thing from the pitch. So Gemini is not fixed to a certain pitch or a star. Rather, Gemini is always 60 degrees from the starting point of the vernal equinox, signifying Aries. Just as fa, 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 do, re, mi, fa, fa is always a set distance from do, no matter where you started off. So Gemini is always a set distance from the vernal equinox point called Aries, 0 degree Aries. Gemini is always 60 degrees from Aries. Whether you started on the G note or the A note or the B note, fa is always the same distance from do. And whether you start the vernal equinox at the star of Ashwini, or if you started at the star of Jesta, or if you started at the star of Uttara Bhadrapada, where it is today, Gemini is always going to be 60 degrees from the vernal equinox. You guys get where I'm at there? The fact that you can move the starting do note in a scale to any pitch and still create the same scale is just like saying that you can have the equinox occur at any star in the star wheel, and it will still be the start of the tropical zodiac. Okay? Let's say, we've got our star wheel here. This is the stars. And let's say that vernal equinox started here at Ashwini. Gemini is always going to be somewhere, 60 degrees from there. So then let's say we start it at somewhere around Shravana. This is where the vernal equinox is. Gemini is going to be 60 degrees from there. This is the stars. The zodiac wheel is something about the Earth and the sun's movement, and it's not set at a fixed point in the sky. Just like in music, musicians change keys for songs all the time. As long as you're in the appropriate key, you're in tune. You can be out of tune. The sun's position at the vernal equinox is the tuning fork. And this has been my big thing that I wanted to lay out to the world. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I have it in my mind. I might show it to Vic Takara. It's a little long-winded. I'm getting better at explaining it, but I hope you guys enjoyed that because I think it's a very important key way of explaining what's going on here. Now, what happened 2,000 years ago is that people glued the do to the G note. If we were to use this metaphorically, let's say this is a G note. Do. I'll just be quick with this. Do is the G note. That's a certain note. Then, 2,000 years later, everybody started singing in A. Do, re, mi, fa. So now that do is a completely different note in the scale. And this is what the sidereal astrologers are doing. It's going to take a little bit more explaining to show more evidence for what that is, but I hope that this gives everybody an idea of what's going on here. So, astrologers of antiquity took a little while before they started to realize what's called the precession of the equinox, which is that the sun's position during spring has shifted in the backdrop of the stars. Hipparchus, when the zodiac was systematized and functionally cemented to a certain star 2,000 years ago, because again, you got to understand that this is what people had to do before the Ephemeris was there. And even, we can go out and buy an Ephemeris, but it was like the high parts of society, some even, think about the Christian crusades who were going and destroying all things remotely related to astrology like in the 1500s and in the thousands in the medieval ages. That kind of thing was going on around this time too. People thought this was sacred knowledge, which means it was only dedicated guru to disciple lineages in India, but in Greek it was a similar thing. This was very precious information to have this sort of ephemeris, to have the opportunity to be connected to an ephemeris of these people who are doing the bird watching. There's no internet. It's all on paper and in people's minds. And it was a deep privilege to be privileged to have an ephemeris so that you could practice astrology. So what did most lay astrologers do who had a vague interest in it, who couldn't always go out to Professor Octagonagus's study in order to do some kind of astronomical musing? They would just look out at the stars and say, okay, Saturn is at Aldebaran. I know that Aldebaran is this many degrees from cosmic east, from the vernal equinox. But this is why it got fixed. This is why they fixed the photograph to the sky at the time. Now, it took astrologers a little while. Again, Hipparchus didn't come out until around 0 AD, 100 AD, I believe. Don't quote me on my exact dates there. But guys like Hipparchus came out and said, we can't keep pointing to Aldebaran. We can't keep pointing to a planet being in Aldebaran to try and judge how far it is from the vernal equinox, because the vernal equinox is moving. That's a very deep astronomical understanding of how planet Earth works. It would take a deep understanding. It's even hard for me to explain, but we're going to go through the precession of the equinox. But it's a hard thing to understand, even for today's minds, let alone 2,000 years ago when people were lucky to even understand what creates the calendar. So it was kind of what started to happen is people started saying that the star map is wrong. Now, a lot of groups got that. In fact, most of the astrology world understood it. The Greeks understood it. The Babylonians understood it. Just about everyone got with the program and stuck with tropical astrology as something that is conveyed by the equinox. Not a fixed point in the sky, but from the point that the sun is at during the first day of spring. That's what moves. Really, it's all the four cardinal points. Now, unfortunately, the Indian people, and I should say this because there is a blessing and a curse that has come from what we call the traditionalism of India. I am not an Indian person. I'm a Caucasian person in Canada, and we have to understand where I'm coming from with this. I'm trying to speak to something that has happened in history. And the first thing I'll say is that I'm a Vedic person. I think the traditionalism of India is one of their great blessings. If the people of India didn't hold so preciously to their ancient scriptures and knowledge, I would not be a Vedic person today. It's a very good thing that they are a traditionalist in this way, but it has its disadvantages. We have to understand that because of the traditionalism of Indian astrologers around 2,000 years ago, specifically because they were susceptible to, they were using the stars before any of us were, because of the Nakshatras. Remember what I said, the Nakshatras, where the moon had its 27 wives in the stars. That was a star-based map, and the Indian people were the only ones doing that for thousands of years before astrology came about. Like I said, Vedic Zodiac astrology happened around 500 BC. The Indians were studying the Nakshatras, the stars, like 2000 BC, probably before that. There's no way of saying, really, how long they've been studying the Nakshatras. So the Indian people were specifically susceptible to marrying what they learned when everybody came together after Alexander the Great, 500 BC. all these cultures came together and were like, hey, everybody, we're chill. No more war for this couple of centuries. Cue the Dark Ages, when there was a lot more war. But before the Dark Ages, around the turn of the millennium, after Alexander the Great, there was this rest period where all these cultures came together and synthesized the idea of personal horoscopy. That was using the vernal equinox through the tropical zodiac. The Indian people were particularly susceptible to having a photographic lock or fixation of the vernal equinox point in the stars because they were already using the stars for the Nakshatras. And the traditionalism of the Indian people caused them to marry, let's say, at the time, they noticed that the vernal equinox was at Ashwini, and it was. And they said, boom, simple, boom Shiva. All we got to do is just count everything from Ashwini. And what they started to do is they started to cross-interpret when someone had the sun in Ashwini and the sun in Aries. They said anyone with early Aries placements is going to have the qualities of Ashwini, the nakshatra. They married them together, and they're the only culture that did that because of this particular susceptibility. Now, that we're going to talk about that more. I'm going to talk about it with Vic Takara on Tuesday, and I'm going to go more into that later on when I do more videos on this series. So, this has been quite the... There's a lot to go through here. You know, I was hoping I could be as concise about this as possible. I hope it's still coming off concisely. We've still got a lot to go through here, folks. Now, I've just lost I'm taking out my earbud because it's making my ear feel funny. If my volume cuts out at any time, folks, just please let me know. Now, we have gotten our brass tacks out here. Let's start. We've got an idea of the Sidereal Zodiac and the Tropical Zodiac, but let's start digging into our scriptural resources for the Tropical Zodiac. Okay, we've been talking about it as this vague figure. Let's kind of burn into it here. How do we define the Tropical Zodiac? We use 2 points. Number one is the solstices and the equinoxes. These define the 4 cardinal points which the remaining months and signs are derived from. This comes from the Surya Siddhanta in the Vedic tradition. B is the lengths of each day. The lengths of each day reveal where we are in the calendar between winter, Capricorn, and summer, Cancer, between winter and summer solstices. I'm going to explain this more as we go on, but essentially what this is saying, both of these are a picture of 6 p.m. In the summer, 6 p.m., it's the evening, but the sun is still very brightly out. In the winter, however, the sun is long gone and it's dark, and it's a winter day. It's still 6 p.m. So the lengths of each, that's because in the summer, the daylight there's much more daylight. And in the winter, there's much less daylight. We all experience this every year, right? Now, let me just explain this really quickly. I am a Vedic person. So my evidence for how the tropical system works is going to come from Vedic scripture, as that is where I would go to dig for these things, and that's where I've been digging. Of course, it would be the same in the Greek or Hellenistic literature. It would just be different people saying the same thing. We know this because we both use Astrodienst. We both, whenever I do charts for people, I have a Vedic chart as well as a Western chart. Not just for their sake. Even if they were a Vedic person who's never seen the circular Western chart, like we've kind of got going on here, even if a Vedic person, I'm doing a chart for them and they've never seen this chart, they don't need to see it. I'm using it for myself because I still use the circular Western chart as a tropical Vedic astrologer. So whether, if any, I should say, if any of you Western astrologers who follow me are seeking answers for the basics of this in Greek or Hellenistic literature, I don't have it because that's not my field of study. But I encourage anyone watching this to join me and find your own scriptures and bring them to YouTube. Come and chat with me because I need all the help I can get out here. And of course, as tropical astrologers, whether you're Vedic or not, our data does not contradict with each other. So we're on the same team. Okay? If you're a tropical astrologer and you attend towards the Hellenistic or Greek tradition, dig through your scriptures like I'm doing here and talk with me about it. I'd love to do that with you. I invite you, and please feel free to get the word out. Tell people about it. I'm in this. As for the Tropical Vedic tradition, Victakara commonly points to the Surya Siddhanta for the first premier definition for what exactly defines the tropical zodiac. In particular, he looks to chapter 14, text 7 through 10 of the Surya Siddhanta. The Surya Siddhanta is considered one of the greats and a fundamental authority of Indian astronomical literature. And this is an Indian text written around 0 to 200 AD. So this is what the Indian people use. Siderealists will say that there are points in this text which say, here the author says that the vernal equinox is at this sign. So therefore, they must be locked in. Somebody like me would say, maybe that was just the reference point he was using at the time. This is how this debate goes on, folks. So, it goes something like this. Draw a line between the two solstices. Draw another line between the two equinoxes. This defines the hub or the core of the wheel of the sky. These two lines are intended to be drawn as a cross, and the cross, of course, has Gnostic resonance with many practitioners of esoteric Western magic. Next, we hear the following, right? So this is the first cross, okay? And this is Earth going around the sun. We know that the Earth has a solstice, and it has a summer solstice and a winter solstice. Between these two, which is all, how do we know this? It's by measuring the lengths of the day. We're going to get to that eventually. So the summer solstice is July 21st. This says June, but I think it's, am I getting my, it is June. I can be so bad with dates in my head, but whatever. It's June 21st is the summer solstice. It's the first degree of Cancer. Winter solstice is December 21st. It's the first degree of Capricorn. Now, the next stanza we read is, between each point on the cross, put two more points or borders. When we place these 2 points between the cross, we get 12 signs. And it's done like this. It's not, the sun is not visiting a certain point in the sky and that signifies that we're entering that sign. It's a matter of dividing the 360 degrees of a circle into 12. Part of the reason we use 12 is because that is how many new moons we observe each year. So this, this is part of the, at least again, this is the Vedic bones of how to understand the tropical zodiac. So next thing that we read is that in the Surya Siddhanta, we next read, it takes 6 months for the sun to reach the northern summer solstice after entering Capricorn. And it takes 6 months to reach the southern or winter solstice after entering Cancer. And this is the only place in the text up to this point that has mentioned any specific zodiac signs. And of course, we read that the 12 divisions beginning from Aries are certainly the months which constitute a year. So we start at Aries, we start at the equinox, and the 12 divisions beginning from that equinox point certainly show the months which constitute a year. One thing that we can surely note is that Aries is not defined at all here as something fixed to the sky or the stars. Aries is based on the midpoint between the two solstices. So, let's now go to our next of our two important aspects of the zodiac, which we've already alluded to as making the tropical phenomenon visible from here on Earth. First, we said that it's the solstices and equinoxes that define the four cardinal points. Now, how exactly do we really know how close we are or where exactly those cardinal points are? We know it by the lengths of each day. Because during the winter solstice, the days are shortest. So let's see from here. During the winter solstice, the days are at their shortest. And from the 6 months from the sun being in Capricorn to the 6 months of the... After 6 months, the sun starts in Capricorn and it eventually gets to Cancer. And the days get longer from here. Then once it's in Cancer, we have another 6 months to get... That's the longest day of the year, is June 21st. Then from Cancer, we know the days get shorter. This is what defines the zodiac. And so this is basically how we can see this. And I wanted to put this in here. This is David Frawley, who is an important sidereal-based Vedic astrologer. He's done a lot of good work for Vedic astrology. One of his early quotes is that the tropical zodiac is not based on observable facts. But of course, we know the tropical zodiac is observable on Earth. The days get longer and shorter, and these are observable aspects of the calendrical solstices and equinoxes. It's just a point that I like to make, right? So these are our two groupings, the solstices and equinoxes, and then the lengths of each day. Now, the Surya Siddhanta hasn't really told us too much about the lengths of each day. And this next bit of information is going to come from another text. So the Vedic people hold this next text in very high esteem. It's more of a Vedic text than an astronomical one. Surya Siddhanta is more astronomical. The next one that we're going to read from is called the Bhagavatam Purana. This is also known as the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's a beautiful book. You can get one by Swami Prabhupada. Vic Takara, in fact, he does a great job clarifying what exactly this Srimad Bhagavatam is in his wonderful class available online. It's called Veda 101. I highly recommend it for anyone interested in the etymology of the authorship in the scriptures of Vedic literature. It's like the Upanishads, the Puranas. Vic does a great job on it in that class. The Puranas are like the coattails of the Vedas. They're meant to be a commentary on the enigmatic and sutra-like nectar of the ancient Vedas. Because the ancient Vedas themselves are often codified and cryptic in their language, because their author is squeezing so much symbolism into each line. So the Puranas attempted to practically apply the essence of the Vedas to everyday facets of life. And this particular one is regarded as an undisputed authority. It's the Bhagavatam Purana. So this is why you'll notice you can find the Vic Takara is going through the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavatam Purana, on his channel. He's just going through the whole thing just because he likes being in the Vedic consciousness. So in Vic's translation of the Srimad Bhagavatam, this is Division 5, Chapter 21, Text number 3. The sun moves at varying speeds between the northern solstice, the summer solstice, and the equinoctial points. its rise towards the northern solstice, its fall towards the southern solstice, and its crossing the middle point can be known by measuring the days. So measuring the days means measuring the actual amount of sunlight, of daylight in a day. This is what the tropical calendar is based on. And a point I'd like to make here is that whether you're in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, the shuttling of the sun from the northern solstice to the southern solstice is like the sun going through the chakras of the earth. And this defines the length of the daylight, and it defines the points of the zodiac. Mind you, it is actually the sun moving through the chakras of the earth that creates the signs from Earth's perspective. So even if you're in Alaska and it's all daylight all the time, the sun and the earth are still in this zodiacal progression, as well as all the planets moving around the Earth's space. Now, the last part of the text tells us that the days and nights grow longer and shorter, revealing which of the signs the sun is in. It's Capricorn, Aquarius, etc. This is how we know what makes up the signs, is the days and nights in their length. Really, the year is broken into 365 days, give or take, and the 0 point of 0 degrees Aries is defined as March 21st, the midpoint between winter and summer solstice. So we also read that when the sun is in Aries and Libra, the days and nights are equal. So that defines the other line of the axis. The main point is that this clarifies for us, as the text says, this reveals to us the signs in a way that we can observe on Earth through a calendar that lines up with the phenomenon of daylight. Right? So I hope that's a little bit more clarifying there, folks. So let's point out that these authoritative texts, there's no mention of Aries being defined as something fixed to the sky or to the stars. The stars have nothing to do with what constitutes Aries, according to these definitions. The zodiac is like Earth and Sun dancing their steps in a romantic embrace, while the room behind them, the stars, spins inconsequentially in the background. So now, the next big part, ladies and gentlemen, the next thing we got to start talking about is the precession of the equinox. It's a bit of a headache to try and describe it. I'm going to start kind of digging into it as we kind of go along here. Where exactly the sun is in the sky at the calendar point of the yearly spring equinox shifts against the background of the stars, the constellations, over thousands of years. It's one of the great modern-day quandaries that has led to this sidereal tropical issue. Now, something that has to be said here. Hello, Teresa. It's nice to see you. So the zodiac is created by a calendar fixed to the natural dates of daylight, where, we know the solstices and we know the equinoxes. There is space implied by this. And this is part of what I kind of want to say here, is that really what the point I'm getting at here is that astrology is what's called an observational science, as people say it. It is a geomantic practice, meaning Earth-centric, not heliocentric, like the sun is the center. That would make sense astronomically. But tropical astrologers are geomantic-minded people, geo relating to geography, relating to Earth. Geocentric. Geomantic is actually a cooler word. You know, like a necromancer is someone who deals with bringing things back from the dead, necro. A geomancer is somebody who uses the energies of Earth. So astrology is a geomantic idea. So there is space implied by the equinox points and the solstices, but the fulcrum of meaning for this space, as it relates to our lives and energy on Earth, it's not the space itself. It's rather the mystical leap of logic is to understand us as being part of the geomantic nexus of energy reflecting off the planets in their orbit through the cardinal points in that space. Just as in a musical scale, it's not the tone or the pitch, but the harmonic resonance and distance between one tone and another that makes melody, that makes a musical scale. Similarly, in astrology, it's not the space, it's not the Saturn being at the star of Aldebaran that gives Saturn zodiacal qualities. It's the distance traveled from the cosmic east point, Aries, that gives a planet its sign position and its degrees. And tropical astrology does not fix east to the surrounding world. Like any true geomancy, tropical east is to the left of where you are. It's the left wing of the Earth's oval orbit around the sun. In other words, tropical astrology is based on where the Earth is oriented with the sun. So, you know, we've often heard like the sort of like, it's almost like a Chinese idea of where is true east. It's left of wherever you're standing, right? So that's kind of how tropical astrologers apply themselves. And again, if you're a tropical astrologer, you use this whenever you use the Astrodienst chart. The energy of us is coming from us. The energy of the planets in their cycles, in astronomically speaking, in their orbits around the sun, and in the Earth's observation of them, we as earthbound people reflect the progression of energy moving around the Earth. So, let's talk a little bit about precession. The precession of the equinox, because the equinox is cosmic east. This is what we're defining as east. So there will be plenty of people who don't understand the anthropological history of astrology in context with what's called the precession of the equinox. There are some Indian astronomical literatures which relate either directly or by association of being included in the same chapter. A lot of Indian works on astrology connect the stars to the zodiac signs. And it's for the reason that we've described, because the Indian people were already very susceptible to this marriage of the sky, of the stars with the planets, because they were already practicing with the Nakshatras before. And you can see, I'll be talking about that particular issue with Victakara, as well as by myself in later videos. Now, the particular connection point that sidereal astrology uses is connecting the idea of Aries to a certain star, and that star is called Ashwini. It's the nakshatra related to horses or horsemen. So this is the big deal in this whole sidereal debate, which has caused a three-way fork in the road. You either believe one of three things, and I invite you to really stretch your brain on it. Three popular conceptions of astrological measurement. You either believe tropical astrology is the only arbiter of cosmic east. You either believe that sidereal astrology the stars is the only arbiter of Aries and cosmic East, or you believe in some kind of integration of both. Such people, like, you know, like for me, for example, I'm a Scorpio in Tropical and I'm a Libra in Sidereal. You know, so, by the way, I should say, I'm really trying to mark this out, but don't think that I'm really making fun of you, because the jury's still ultimately out on a lot of this stuff. That's how you should think of it. You should do your own digging, watch videos like mine, and I hope I make an impression because I'm on Team Tropical. But, you know, I was on the fence for a long time. So some people think that Sidereal and Tropical overlap. They represent two different systems that each have a resonance in different dimensions of the person's soul. For example, people say that the Tropical Zodiac relates to more earthly matters, whereas the Sidereal relates to more spiritual or soulful things. That's the part that really grinds my gears as a tropical person, because astrology for me is astrology is astrology. And the tropical people are studying something that is spiritual and material, just like the Siderealists are. I digress. This may be hard to say, like harsh, but for the sake of clarity, I contend that this third option is being caused by fence sitters who, in this matter, who don't want to dig into this stuff that I'm talking about. They just want to get on with it and practice astrology. They don't know what's what, and so they say, well, I guess I'm open to the idea that even though the sun was tropically in Scorpio when I was born, I could be a Libra. That being said, a fence sitter just might mean that you're still digesting your decision. Don't feel bad about being in that place. I should say, I'm a Leo rising, guys. I like to have the attitude, it's all tropical, man. But I got to where I am by not being hard-headed in picking one. I've been doing this digging for a long time, and it's taken me a long time to come out here on YouTube and say I'm pretty darn sure. Here's my reasons for believing that I'm a tropical astrologer and that everyone should be. But it's better than sticking to the wrong side. I very well could be, you know, this is the tricky thing about this. But I was a fence sitter before I became convinced through people like Vic Takara and Ernst Wilhelm that tropical was the way to go for me. So we must understand that much of what has come historically since the new millennium has been, in my idea, tainted by this marriage of Aries with Ashwini, because much of the literature that was created in the nativity of astrology around 0 AD occurred while the spring equinox was still situated at the point where Ashwini was in the sky. So a main argument here is that while Siderealists may point to certain texts which correlate Ashwini with the sign of Aries, my contention is that these texts were written at a time where precession of the equinox was not fully yet understood. Either that, or there were mistranslations which might seem to convey such. Now, Nicholas Boak is saying it's actually integration or dissociation. I wonder if you mean like those are two choices. It's like you're either integrating both or you're dissociating something, Nicholas. I understand, but I'm going to try to convey through my own unique way why I think that not only tropical is the way to go, but the other two options are not feasible when applied to the logic in the context of how all this came about. Really, one of my main points is that the Siderealists came up with the idea of Aries being at Ashwini at the time when the vernal equinox actually was at Ashwini. So we're going to get there. But I appreciate everybody being open-minded. Even as I conk you on the head with all this logic and knowledge, always question authority. It's one of my favorite phrases coming from Timothy Leary. I'm really not an authority. All I have is evidence-based facts that I've dug up. But you gotta feel it out for yourself here, folks. No matter how much I say that tropical is the way to go, you've got to feel that in your bones, so that you're not just acting on the cleverness of a pundit like me. Because you could easily go and talk to another sidereal person, and you're back in the same place. It is what it is, folks. This is just people like me are coming out and wrestling and having fun doing it just for the sake of doing it. And I hope you are too. So what exactly is the precession of the equinox? Let's look at some illustrations to see into what exactly we mean by this. It's a tricky thing. I find visuals will help to clarify things a bit. In order to do so, we have to have a visual of the sky against the background of the zodiac spinning in the foreground. Sky in the background, zodiac in the foreground. That would be the tropical ideal. So we do have a kind of a way of doing so. Really, how I would convey it, because there's no such thing as the Sidereal Zodiac. So what I do is I use the Nakshatras as a Vedic person. The 27 or 28 Nakshatras are actual star constellations. And these are completely separate from the zodiac signs that we've already described. The zodiac is a whole different thing from the actual circle of the 27 nakshatra places. I wish my light wasn't messing with me on this here. These two wheels can be combined together in a reading as long as they are treated separately. Teresa's asking, you said, I thought Vic did sidereal nakshatras. Vic does do sidereal nakshatras because the sidereal stars are a whole different thing from the tropical zodiac. Teresa, by you saying that, you've made me want to make an important point, and I thank you for your question. Tropical Vedic astrologers use tropical astrology zodiac signs, but they don't completely eschew the sidereal nakshatras, the stars. The stars aren't useless to us as tropical astrologers. The stars have a whole other horoscopology. The point that I'm trying to make is that they are not interwedded. And you can. You know, for example, when I was born, the moon was in Sagittarius. According to the present tropical chart of tropical Vedic astrology, I was born when the moon was in Sagittarius, and the moon was in the star space of Jyesta. So that means my moon's nakshatra is Jyesta. And I consider me to have both. I feel like if you understand Jyesta, you might see my character in this whole video. Now I'm just reading what Susie's saying here. Susie is digging. Yes, the nakshatras are not aligned with the signs, the rashis. They are their own asterisms. Agreed. So I know that I've got a lot of people who are in my same camp here. Now, the nakshatras, let's just take a quick little peek at some of our nakshatras here. These are some of the nakshatras and what they look like. The nakshatras were actually once considered to be the main guts of what makes astrology tick. It was used as the calendrical basis for times to perform sacred rites in the sacred Vedic ritual, which was not necessarily, it's not what you might be thinking. Like, nobody would die in these situations. Although sometimes the prized goat of rich individuals who intended to give the best of their livestock as a gesture to the divine, sometimes the best goat would unfortunately be sacrificed. I think in today's time, there's probably a better way to go about that. But it is what it is. Yeah. I don't live in India, so I didn't live there anciently, so different time, I'm all about kind of, animals are cool. If we don't have to sacrifice them, that's cool. But, it's just like the ritual offering of sacred ghee into the Vedic kunda, the sacred fire. Farmers would take their best ghee, and it's the best. It's full of healthful product, and it's the best of the stuff. They would throw it away. It's kind of like the Indian, the Tibetan monks who make pictures out of sand. They take all this time to make these beautiful pictures out of sand, and what do they do at the end? Useless material. The spirit is infinite. The material is finite. But I can still embrace my heart's connection to the material in this moment as long as I don't get attached to the result. Same thing with ghee. It's my best ghee. I worked so hard. My cows worked so hard to make this ghee. Giving it up to the divine. It's like a gesture. And they would do this kind of stuff based on when the moon was in certain stars. They would do this when the moon was in certain nakshatras. Victakara calls nakshatras the authentic heart of Vedic astrology. We can see there's all these little things are the star formations of some of these nakshatras. Now this wheel here is the wheel of 27 nakshatras that is often shown around a zodiac. So now we can kind of start talking about what precession is. Let's just say most so-called sidereal astrologers regard that the star called Ashwini is connected to the beginning of the sign of Aries. It's fixed or married to the beginning of the sign of Aries. So we can see here, within this wheel, we can see the 12 signs: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sag, Cap, Aquarius, Pisces, and then Aries. Now around it, we see that there is the twisting of the nakshatras. And really, each one of these nakshatras even has their 4 padas, which are split into 3 1/3 sections or degrees, basically. So this is how they think of it. Me and Vic Dakar are going to talk about the 4-finger theory, where they think the sidereal people have always assumed and thought, this is the old theory, remember, Aries being aligned with Ashwini Nakshatra. This actually isn't the case. Although, yeah, so this is what the Siderealists say, is that Aries is inherently connected to the beginning of Ashwini, right? And there's a whole thing, Vedic astrologers will know what I'm talking about, where the Navamsha in every sign has 9 Navamshas. It's 3 1/3 degrees long. And this 3 1/3 degrees lines up with certain padas of the nakshatras. It's a tricky thing to explain, but we'll save it for another day. So, all in all, they think that Aries, the tropical zodiac sign, is lined up with Ashwini. Now, Ashwini is a star that did line up with the sun's position during the spring equinox 2,000 years ago. And this is regarded as the vulnerable point in the timeline of Vedic astrology's modern evolution, when people at the time had little knowledge of the precession of the equinox. They decided that they had to pick some sort of understanding. They rashly married the background space wheel of the stars to the foreground tropical wheel. Now, this is modern Aries aligned with Uttara Bhadrapada. You might recognize this as a something that has come from Victakara. So this is the 27 nakshatras overlaid upon the 12 tropical zodiac signs. And we see this is Ashwini right here. In today's time, the vernal equinox is what begins Aries, and this is in Uttara Bhadrapada. This is behind Ashwini because the equinox has preceded. It's gone backwards against the backdrop of the sky. So now Aries actually starts in the nakshatra of Uttara Bhadrapada, right? So I have a little bit of a visual to kind of show what's going on here. Now, this is something I made a long time ago, and it looks a little bit funky, but this is just, you know, I wanted to keep this and use this because it's useful enough. So this is the same chart. You see this funky chart that I've got going here. This same chart I have as the background here. We can see Kritika, we can see Ashwini here, we can see Uttara Bhadrapada. So this is Aries in today's time is at Uttara Bhadrapada. So let's say the position of the vernal equinox. And what do we mean by this? Let's just quickly just ground ourselves again. So much information being thrown at us. What is the vernal equinox? The vernal equinox is the point where the sun is in the sky during the midpoint between winter solstice and summer solstice. The earth comes from winter solstice where there's little light, and the daylight gets longer as it starts to come up the zodiac. Eventually it reaches Aries, where that's the midpoint, where that's an equal amount of sunlight and an equal amount of night. That's what Aries is. That is March 21st in our yearly calendar. That is the vernal equinox point. So where is the sun in relation to the earth in the backdrop of the sky on March 21st? That's what we're talking about here. Well, 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, the sun, let's say the earth is in the middle of this. The sun would have been aimed at this star grouping known as Kritika. And this would have been 4,000 years ago. This would have been March 21st. The sun lines up with the star of Kritika 4,000 years ago. Okay? Now, 2,000 years ago, let's say we are looking at the vernal equinox point is the red arrows here. The red arrows are pointing at March. Where's the sun in the sky on March 21st? We see that it's moving in the backdrop of the stars. So now it's at the star of Ashwini. March 21st, 2,000 years ago. So this did line up perfectly with the beginning of Ashwini. Now in today's time, 2,000 years later, it's 2023, Tropical Aries, which is cosmic east, it's the vernal equinox point. When we see the sun in the sky on March 21st, the sun is positioned at this star grouping, Uttara Bhadrapada. See, the equinox point has been going backwards in the sky. Does everybody understand that? It's a difficult thing to explain. Please feel free to ask me if I can clarify anything, and I'll do my best to. So we see that due to precession, there was clearly a point 4,000 to 5,000 years ago when the sun's position at the yearly spring equinox lined up with the star Kritika, which is actually ahead of Ashwini, because precession causes the equinox to move the point counterclockwise in the sky. Then around 0 AD, the star Ashwini lined up with the equinox. So we know that the equinox is the tropical definition of Aries. In this critical moment when astrology was popular but the precession was not yet fully understood, people just assumed that these 2 points were naturally married together. But as the years went on, the equinox kept moving to the point where the sun during the equinox now actually lines up with Uttara Bhadrapada, which is way behind Ashwini. So I'm going to clarify this for you folks, okay? This is where the sun was on March 21st, 2,000 years ago. Now, this is what created the Sidereal Aries. It's an arbitrary thing. Now, the sun on March 21st is over here. We could almost call this sidereal 7 degrees of Pisces. Does everybody understand that? Remember when we looked up the chart? In the sidereal chart, we looked up March 21st, 1993. the sun was at sidereal Pisces. That's because, according to them, Aries got stuck at this point. Now they consider the sun to be in sidereal Pisces. Now I have to ask you, what exactly is it that makes that point sidereal Aries? I'm going to explain it to you right now, folks. Hate to lay these pins in on the sidereal community. At this point, I feel like if you're watching, I'm probably just preaching to the choir. I got to break this video down. There's so much to go into. I'm probably going to have shorter videos as excerpts from this video, but I digress. This is how I read the historical timeline. Why did people get fixated on Aries at the time? It went something like this. Around 2,000 or so years ago, the equinox was lined up with Ashwini, as we said, right? 2,000 years ago, the sun lined up with this point, Ashwini. Okay? This is 0 degrees sidereal Aries. Mankind observed the section of sky where the sun was just after the spring equinox. And they noted, if someone was born at the time of the year, around just after the vernal equinox, they noticed that that person would have the qualities of the ram, and this because the sun was in tropical Aries at the time. True astrologers knew that it wasn't because the sun was at Ashwini. True tropical astrologers, as per my perspective, knew that this was not a space phenomenon. It wasn't because the sun was in that space. It was because it was March 21st on the calendar that somebody had the qualities of the ram when they were born on March 21st. This had nothing to do with the stars in the background. It wasn't a sidereal phenomenon. It had to do with the fact that the person was born March 21st. However, the lay astrologers at that time believed that the physical space and the stars were the important part, even though this went against the authoritative scriptures at the time. Perhaps because astrology as a whole is always susceptible to becoming a fad to people who neglect its fundamentals, because it's due to the power of self-knowledge that it represents. I know a little bit about astrology. 2,000 years ago, that might mean that you're not just some peasant who doesn't know nothing about nothing. You might know a thing or two about the self and the soul, and you might be able to gain power through it. Ooh, he's a mystic. He can predict things. Everyone was was into that power. So everyone wanted to get in on the game. And so they all said, oh, okay, I get it. Stars. Makes sense. So what they did, these lay people who neglected the fundamentals of tropical method, they used their eyes first instead of using their ears to listen to the wisdom of the sages and of the scripture. And thus, they missed the Vedic or Greek astronomical scripture that came from the ancients on the subject. So, with their hopeful imaginations, remember, like I said, let's say somebody was born March 21st, 2,000 years ago. They would notice, because this person was born just after the vernal equinox, they said, this person, as they grow up, they've had the qualities of the ram. So what they did was that they looked up where the sun was in the sky during that vernal equinox point, and you know what they said? They said, you know what? I see a ram. I see a ram in them stars. Can't you see it? The horns? Can't you see the horns and the hooves? Like, that's a ram. Do you see a ram? Yeah, that's a ram. That's the ram, of course. This is no different than the imagination subconsciously projecting faces in the clouds, which aren't really there. In other words, what we call the sidereal tradition of zodiacal constellations is merely a hallucination. There are recognizable star patterns, rather. There are recognizable star patterns, but these are the Nakshatras. But the 12-sign zodiac as we know it has nothing to do with them, has nothing to do with the stars. This is why I'm saying the constellation, the star constellation of Aries the Ram, doesn't actually exist. It's a contradiction. Aries does not exist in the stars. That is a projection of the subconscious, just like seeing faces in the clouds. It's a hallucination. We, tropical astrologers, don't use it. Again, on March 21st, the sun is at 0 degrees Aries. If you use any common tropical astrology software, that's what you'll find. But that is technically 7 degrees of sidereal Pisces. And this is because the Siderealists calculate Aries based on a projection in the clouds, an old point on a map where we're no longer at. East has literally shifted. But these folks are like, nope, that's not what the map says. Now, it's at this point, I've been saying some hard facts here, folks. If you've been with me so far, you're already starting to, this is some tough stuff. Even me saying that this whole tradition of Siderealists is a hallucination is tough stuff. Now, let's abide by the logic of why we're saying this. We have to, some of you may be thinking, let's just digest this here for a minute, okay? How do we define where planets are in the tropical zodiac? We say, how far has Saturn? Let's say Saturn is in Scorpio. When we use, through software, we don't need to use the stars anymore. So what we mean when we say, for example, that Saturn is in Scorpio is that it has progressed, let's see, 180, 200, that Saturn has progressed 210 degrees of the circle from the cosmic east point, which is the vernal equinox. Cosmic east is March 21st, is where the sun is pointed on March 21st. It's really because when you think about it, I'll just show this quick little picture here, right? So if the Earth is here if the sun is in Aries, that means Earth is to the left in this picture, right? And so the sun is facing Aries. Mind you, this picture is flipped because I have astronomical dyslexia. So the Earth is over here in Libra, which means the sun is over here in Aries. That is cosmic east, people, right? That's what we are calling cosmic east. Now, some of you may be thinking, maybe there could be more than one east. Like I said, those who believe that tropical and sidereal could be possible options. Well, it's good to explore all possible options. But let us consider the anthropological history here. 2,000 years ago, the tropical east, the vernal equinox, happened to be pinned to a certain star. Again, it's always going to line up with some star, right? Is it a coincidence that the map, which people froze in the sky at the time when astrology was finally getting its ephemerides down? Remember when I said that astrology was very difficult 2,000 years ago because you could only see it for half the day, and whatever you could see for half the day, you could only see for one half of the year. Then you would have to wait till next year. You would have to wait till the other half of the year to see the other half. And even then, you would only be seeing it for half the day. So astrology has always been a difficult thing, a heavy thing to really do until they started plotting ephemerides, which means plotting the motions of the planets. And this is a tricky thing to do. Again, it was like the bird watchers. The warblers nest here in Philadelphia, and then they go up to Toronto. And they're all saying, yes, the birds are here, the warblers are here now, which means they're going to appear in Toronto. Eventually, after centuries, I'm talking centuries, because remember, again, 500 BC, after Alexander the Great was done, astrology converged from different cultures, but they still didn't have it down. It wasn't until about 500 years later, 0 AD, 100 AD, that they had been plotting the birds, they had been plotting the crazy drivers long enough that they could develop an established ephemeris. Because remember, like I said, if you try to plot a car going 60 miles per hour for an hour, you can expect it will have gone 60 miles in an hour. But the planets they all have weird retrogrades, and they're ovular in their orbits, which means they're slower and faster sometimes. So they had to conduct over 500 years these ephemerides that they could convey these through. So, is it a coincidence that the map, 0 AD, the map which people froze on the sky at the time when astrology was finally getting its ephemerides down, happened to pin Aries to the tropical vernal equinox at the time? Is that a coincidence? The vernal equinox point, because remember again, someone was born just after March 21st. The vernal equinox point was at Ashwini, and people said, oh, look, this kid has the Aries. He's an Aries sun. It must be because the sun is at Ashwini. All of this happened at the time when the vernal equinox was at Ashwini. Now, I've already got some questions here, folks, and I can see that these are good. You guys are just hanging out with me and talking. Okay. So, let me give you guys an example that brings this all home. Okay? Let's say, for a hypothetical example, that a meteor hits planet Earth right now, and civilization had to start over. Let's say 4,000 years later, people start getting their shit together again, and they started plotting planets with a new ephemeris. They started to have the feeling that astrology was a thing, and they started to plot the motions of these planets. And the planets are like these crazy drivers. It's hard to mark them. So over 500 years, they finally start to get a grip on the nature of these planets revolving around. They begin to remember astrology, but since they don't have astrology software, they have to remember the flight paths of all these crazy drivers, and like the bird watchers, getting the flight paths of those birds over centuries, they develop a new ephemeris. They begin to know the movements of the planets, whether it's during the day when the sun is blinding, or at night when they could be seen. That doesn't matter because they have an ephemeris. They can plot the planets of where they are. They have everything that they need to do astrology again. But let's say just like 2,000 years ago, they didn't know about the precession of the equinox. Let's say that they didn't understand that the sun on March 21st is revolving against the backdrop of the sky. They forgot it. They forgot that the precession of the equinox is a thing. So, when someone is born on March 21st, 4,000 years from now, okay, this is a new planet, new Earth. And they know astrology is real because when someone is born, when the sun is at this point, the vernal equinox, they say, oh, look, it's an Aries. The kid is an Aries for sure. He's hard-headed. He's got all those Aries qualities. Since they have forgotten precession, they will assume it is the stars that give the character. So they will project, what will they do? They will look at where the sun is at the vernal equinox, and they'll say, what will they say? they'll say, you know what? I see a ram. Yeah, that star has kind of got like some horns. You know, it's kind of got some hooves. It's like the face of a ram. So if they follow what happened in history in today's time, basically just like what happened 2,000 years ago, if they follow what happened in history and they are very traditional minded, they will fix that arbitrary point where the sun is on March 21st. They will fix it to a star and they will hold to that point religiously. And what will that star be? Well, we know that, so think about it. The equinox currently falls, okay, so I'll put it this way. In 2,000 years, the equinox proceeds 23 degrees in space. We know this because right now, on March 21st, sidereal, when you look at the sun in a sidereal chart, it's at 7 degrees of Pisces. March 21st is the vernal equinox. So we know that the point where the sun is during the vernal equinox has proceeded 23 degrees away from where Aries used to be 2,000 years ago. So that means in 2,000 years, it's going to proceed another 23 degrees. And in 4,000 years, it's going to have proceeded 46 degrees. So in 4,000 years, the equinox will fall around the star Altair. It's close to Shravana Nakshatra. Do you know where the star Altair is in the present Sidereal Zodiac? Which considers, you know, in the current, if the Sidereal Astrologers, the maps that they use, where is the star Altair? Basically, 2,000 years from now, the vernal equinox is going to fall at 14 degrees of Sidereal Aquarius. That's why people say the Age of Aquarius is coming. And another 2,000 years after that, the vernal equinox, the sun's position at March 21st, are going to fall into the star of Altair, Shravana Nakshatra. And that is 21 degrees of what is currently called Sidereal Capricorn. So, it's 4,000 years. 4,000 years from now, okay? A kid is born at March 21st. They forgot all their history. They forgot all their previous history. They don't know about the precession of the equinox. But they notice when a kid is born, when on March 21st or 22nd, that's the vernal equinox. And they say, oh, the kid's in Aries. The sun at that point will actually be at 21 degrees of what is now Sidereal Capricorn. And do you know what they would call that point? If they followed the same historical timeline as happened in our history, they would look at the space of stars of what is now called 21 degrees of Sidereal Capricorn, and they'd say, you know what? I see a ram. And they would call it Sidereal Aries. Now I ask you, why would they be any more wrong or right than the people who today claim that Sidereal Aries belongs at the star Ashwini and that the equinox falls at 7 degrees of Pisces? It's all a hallucination. Seeing faces in the clouds that aren't actually there. Sidereal Aries is a non sequitur. It's always being created by the vernal equinox. People just forget about the precession of the equinox. It never existed. Sorry to be so hard about it, but I'm bringing up this hypothetical situation so that people can see that the idea of the vernal equinox moving into sidereal Pisces, what is sidereal Pisces? It's bullshit. Tell your friends, folks. This is very important. And this, of course, is leading us to the last corner of what I intended to describe in this video. There's already so much. I knew this would be a long video. For those of you who are hanging out with me and watching with me, I'm very glad to have you guys here. Thank you for your patience. Please let me know if I could get this simpler. I realize now that it's tough stuff to get at, because I see Vic Takara and he does his thing, and even when I was watching him early on, it's still so thick astronomically. It's hard to grasp. But it is doable. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is that, as I've just described, the idea that we are in 7 degrees of sidereal Pisces, it's based on a fixation on a point that has never had any meaning. What does this mean for us? Well, does anybody remember? Now, we've gone through the stuff that I think the Vedic people would be needing to hear. I think from here, the Vedic astrologers can now have hash to deal with. Hit me with it. Tell me about it, folks. But for those Western astrologers who are here hanging with me, we have one more issue to deal with. Does anybody remember what was the whole reason for me beginning this video? The Age of Aquarius is about to get debunked. And I'm sure many of you have already caught on to why. What is it all about that's going to be debunking the Age of Aquarius? Why am I hitting so hard on what people call the Age of Aquarius? Think about it for a moment. We've already talked about how the sidereal signs are all bullshit. Capulet, you are correct in saying in a way that the zodiac is points in time, while the nakshatras are points in space. That's a good way of looking at it. I'm glad the visuals are helping, Susie. Thank you for letting me know. Why is it that the Age of Aquarius is bullshit? Let's start getting into it, folks. I've recently made deep inroads to understanding that what people call the coming Age of Aquarius is a complete farce. And those who are with me so far are probably intuiting why. As the astrological age theory goes, the precession of the equinox has caused the point where the sun lies, where the sun is on March 21st, the vernal equinox. That point where the sun is has shifted in the background of the stars. So it started 2,000 years ago. It was at Ashwini. It's the beginning of what was once called Sidereal Aries. So let me just show this picture. Here we go. So this is a little bit more visualizations of what the precession of the equinox is all about, right? Unfortunately, this isn't a good image of it, but you know what? I tried to do something here, folks, and I'm going to do it. I took the time on it, so I might as well. This is a picture of the precession of the equinox, but there's a problem with it because we see the band is the zodiac. Now, we'll notice that this is what's actually going on here. It's really a difficult astronomical thing to convey. I have found a GIF that is going to help us only a little bit. And hopefully everybody can see what I'm looking at here. This little circle at the top is the north point of planet Earth. This, see the green band that's going through the orange is the equinox point. The red band is just basically a fixed point of the zodiac. It's a lot to convey. So I'm going to leave this here for just a moment so people can kind of get what I'm looking at. Now, yeah, good enough. So this picture is conveying the same thing. This is Earth, And Earth is actually tilted in this way. So we can see that there is this spinning going on, and it's the spinning that is actually the celestial equator, and this is kind of like the signs as we actually know them. Now, the band around it is these signs, but these are sidereal signs. You notice in this picture that the vernal equinox is at the beginning of Pisces. These people were trying to describe the precession of the equinox. Unfortunately, this is the vernal equinox point. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it's hard, heady stuff. But we can see here that the vernal equinox is now at sidereal Pisces. Of course, sidereal Pisces does not actually exist. It's a non-thing. That's why no one has made this yet. I would love to see somebody make this picture. I'm not an illustration person, but I would love if somebody would make this picture, and instead of this saying Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, to put the Nakshatras, the 27 Nakshatras in this band. Then this would be a truly useful picture. But we don't have such a thing. That's why I made this dinky little thing. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I'm going to do my best with it. Here is our stars. This is the stars, folks, and we can see there's Ashwini, there's Revati, there's Uttara Bhadrapada. What has happened in our history, folks? Here is the Earth. It's big, round. Damn, that's a pretty good-looking Earth, you might say. So, this is what has happened in our history. Let me see if I can... It would actually be more like this. Okay? So this is the zodiac. And the sun is here on Aries. Of course, the Earth is spinning, but really there's also spinning around the sun that we've got to account for. There's a lot to account for here. What has basically happened is that the vernal equinox point of Aries has gone and spun. It was at Ashwini. Then it was at Revati. Now it is at Uttara Bhadrapada. It doesn't really do it. We need to get somebody to make a cool illustration for this. But I digress. Arts and crafts time. I hope you guys enjoyed that. So, what we are getting at here, this is the nature of the equinox preceding. It has to do with the fact that the North Pole is going through these northern stars and spinning in this way. Really, it's actually spinning like this. Hard thing to convey. But as the Earth, we know the Earth spins on its... right? It spins every 24 hours. But over 24,000 years, it's also doing this thing that is causing it to have this wobble. And it's this wobble that's creating the precession of the equinox. So, that's why this picture is here. Now, the whole point that we're trying to get at with all of this, folks, is that how do people describe the Age of Aquarius? What they say is that the equinox point was at these different signs in the sky, because they're assuming that the stars are still these signs that matter for some reason, okay? Now, I hope you guys can see what I'm looking at here. This is how people describe the Age of Aquarius, because we're looking at the Age of Aquarius debunked right now. The spring equinox, so this is the Earth, and we can see the sun. The sun's position is changing in the backdrop of the starry sky. Now, the spring equinox was at the age of Taurus around 6,500 years ago. I don't know if those dates are exact, but I digress. This is what people said was the age of Taurus. It's when the equinox, the point where the sun is on March 21st, was at sidereal Taurus, quote unquote. right? So I feel like it's not 6,500. I feel like that date is wrong. I feel like that would have been like 4,000 years ago. But I digress. The age of Aries, quote unquote, was, I guess the age of Aries started around 4,000 years ago. Then around 0 AD, people say that Christ was born after the sun was on March 21st, the sun lined up with the Sidereal Aries, which we call Ashwini Nakshatra. And this began the age of Aries. Am I right on this? No, I'm not. Sorry, folks. Okay, so Ninja is asking, according to this, we're technically still in the age of Pisces, okay? That's where we are technically, according to this theory of the age of Aquarius, we are in the age of Pisces, which would mean 2,000 years ago, the sun at the equinox got to Sidereal Aries, and then it went into the age of Pisces. And this is why people say Jesus Christ was born around the turn of the millennium. 0 AD is because that was the time when Jesus was born that we got into the age of Pisces. We're still in the so-called age of Pisces. Yes, okay. We're on the same track here. Good. So the age of Pisces started around 0 AD. Thank you, Capulet. I appreciate you, my friend. The age of Pisces started around 10 AD, etc. So this is what's conveyed. So that means, let's say 4,000 years ago, probably more, let's say 2,500 years ago, 4,500 years ago. Let's say it was 2000 BC, 2,500 BC. We would have been in the age of Aries, moving towards the Sidereal Aries place. It is what it is. This is hard stuff to explain, folks. But the sun at March 21st would have been in Taurus, let's say 6,000 years prior, right? Then 4,000 years ago, it entered the field of Aries. Then 2,000 years ago, it entered the field of Pisces. Of course, because they're going backwards. So once the sun, on March 21st, the equinox, once it passed Aries, Sidereal Aries, which happened at around 0 AD, Sidereal Aries, then the sun came into the field of Sidereal Pisces. And this was around 0 AD to up till now. Now, in modern times, the spring equinox is at so-called 3 degrees of so-called Sidereal Pisces. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 degrees, somewhere around there. So, it's a headache to try and describe, folks, and I'm sorry that I wasn't as clear as I could describe that. But this is what people understand to be the age of Pisces. Has to do with the fact that the sun was in, right now, on March 21st, the vernal equinox lands at around 3 to 7 degrees of Pisces. It has traveled that many degrees from what was called Sidereal Aries. To bring it all back, I wish I didn't focus on that so much, but I had to. No big deal. What we have to understand, ladies and gentlemen, is that Sidereal Aries, as we've just described, doesn't actually exist. As we said in our hypothetical example, if there was a meteor that hit the planet, and 4,000 years from now, we had the vernal equinox occur, it would be occurring in the age of Capricorn, quote unquote, in Sidereal Capricorn, okay? 21 degrees of Capricorn. But if people forgot their astrology, and if things happened just like it did in history in today's time, what would happen is that they would get their ephemerides. We're talking 4,000 years in an apocalyptic world. They would develop on their ephemerides. And if they forgot about the precession of the equinox, if a child was born during the vernal equinox, March 21st, they were an Aries. And people would say, oh, look, people born when the sun is at that point they're an Aries. That would mean that that is the point of Aries to them. And they would create a new Sidereal Aries. These are arbitrary placements. They would look in the sky and they would point out the stars that were there, and they would say, you know what? The stars of Altair, which is where that point, the vernal equinox, would be at the time, 4,000 years from now. They would say, oh, look, I can see a ram in there. Just like I said, it's a hallucination. It's like looking at the clouds and seeing faces. They would look at the sky, because children born at the time during the vernal equinox, which is the true tropical astrology, they would say, a child born at March 21st seems to be an Aries, and oh, look, when I look in the sky where Aries is, I see a ram. And they would call it Sidereal Aries. And if they were religiously stuck on that, even as the equinox proceeded from there, and what makes people an Aries would have gone far from that point after that, if they are like the traditionalists and the traditional Indian Siderealists, they would say Altair is the true star that shows us what Aries is. And we would have the same problem then with Aries being connected to Altair as we have today with Aries being connected with Ashwini. The whole point is that there is no Sidereal Pisces. There is no Sidereal Aquarius. The vernal equinox is not coming, it's not in Sidereal Pisces and going to Sidereal Aquarius. There was never such a thing. So Amanda has asked, are the ages in general not relevant? It depends on who you ask and how you ask. Now, I want you guys to dig that as you watch more of my videos that I'm going to be coming out with soon, I'm going to be talking about the idea that there is a sort of ages. I'm an evolutionary astrologer as well as a tropical Vedic astrologer. I'm really interested in Jeffrey Wolf Green, and he talks about the possibility that an age of Aquarius is coming, but it has nothing to do with the precession of the equinox. What it has to do with is that the south node of Pluto is in Capricorn right now. It's going to be in Capricorn until 2800 AD, and since the nodes of Pluto move forward, the nodes of Pluto are going to move into Aquarius. In the south node of Pluto is going to move into Aquarius in 2800 AD. Right now, we're in what I would describe, since about 500 AD, Pluto's south node has been in Capricorn. So we've been in the age of Capricorn, of materialism, patriarchy, anti-feminism, working your ass off for slave labor. We're in the south node age of Capricorn. That's why Cancer things are important, because Cancer is the north node of Pluto right now. That's something I'm going to talk about in my other videos, but that is not for us to get into in this video. All of this is aimed to give us a clear picture of how the stars and the Nakshatras are something completely different from the tropical zodiac signs. And we, as tropical astrologers, should be taking this whole idea of the age of Aquarius and chucking it in the garbage. Excuse me for getting, I try not to get too hot about these things. I'm really not. I just like to get excited. The idea of the Age of Aquarius is based on the Sidereal Zodiac, which, as we've just described, is bogus. I hope that this video has described this in a way. I'm going to have to take all the chunks of this video and piece them together so that people can digest them easily, because this has been a long video. Now, I'll be doing more digging and research into the sidereal tropical thing as time goes on. But I intended this video to be as basic as possible for those very large numbers of people who aren't astronomically or scripturally savvy enough to care to dig deeply into deciding where they should go on this debate. For those interested in more information, I'm going to try to come on and get into this subject more. Stay tuned on Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. EST. I'm going to have Vic DeCara on, and me and him are going to rap about this. And even after that, I'll be exploring more on this subject. But I really hope that this was a good primer for the nature of this debate happening in the astrology world today from the perspective of Tropical Vedic Astrologers. Thank you so much, everybody, for hanging out with me. Now, I'm just going to take a quick peek. We've had lots of questions, or at least lots of comments, and I haven't really been able to sort of dig through. As I dig through, feel free to ask me any questions. I'm going to do my best with the knowledge that I have to try and answer them. There's a lot of scriptural things that I'm sure people would ask. I plan on getting into more of the scripture of things later on. I imagine more of my Vedic crowd will be asking me about scriptural questions. I digress. Feel free to hit me with what you can right now. I'm just looking on my phone to see all of our comments. It's definitely being said that Nakshatras are more like space and Tropical Zodiac is more like time in a sort of way. Looks like lots of people Susie says, think of the signs as slices of 30 degrees, not the constellations. Good one, Susie. Susie Underwood has a good little point here. The constellations are of various sizes, and there wasn't common agreement of where, for example, Leo ended and Virgo started until recently in the sidereal world. Even still, a lot of people say like Virgo is like this huge star space, which really doesn't make any sense. Why would any sign be any more degrees than any other sign? That totally takes it away from at least the tropical understanding of the zodiac. Glad the visuals are helping everybody out. I guess our friend Sparkling City Savage the Truth is saying that we should check out things within, meditate, and ground yourself. Travel the universe and see up close and personal internally. That's pretty cool. Aquarius is more about technology. I thought we were already in it. So a lot of people think that we are in the age of Aquarius. Baba J has said there is a sidereal zodiac and a tropical zodiac, and both are true. It's not one or the other. So I would consider watching what we've done in this video. Basically, my whole hypothetical metaphor for 4,000 years. If people, it's the coincidence of just when, at the time, when people were getting their ephemerides figured out, that they decided to pin Aries, Sidereal Aries, to the Vernal Equinox that was there at the time. Is it a coincidence that just as astrology was starting to get on its feet, that they pinned Sidereal Aries to the Vernal Equinox at that point, and the Vernal Equinox has now fallen away from it. If that is the case, that would make Sidereal Aries completely arbitrary. And that's why I showed the example. If we went 4,000 years into the future and there was a whole new astrological creation, they would pin Sidereal Aries to a whole new point, and it would be just as arbitrary then as it is now. So that's my whole point on that, Baba J. I hope that makes things a little bit more clear. Age of Capricorn in today's time makes more sense than Pisces to Amanda. I'm glad to hear that. Capulet's asking about the ancient Sumerians. She's heard, Capulet's heard that they knew about the precession of the equinox, but weren't around long enough to know. I'm not sure. I don't know too much about the Sumerians. I'm intrigued by it. Precession of the galactic center into Capricorn will happen in a couple centuries. That's interesting. When I kept up with the precession, many authors described the attributes of the ages as being opposite because the precession ran backwards. Ages are a funny thing. You know, my idea of Pluto's south node being in Capricorn shows that there is an oppositional tug through nodes. And that, so if we're in the age of Capricorn, because the south node of Pluto is in Capricorn, there's a tug on Cancer, because the north node would be in Cancer. And I hope that that's something that's clarifying for with regard to what the age of Capricorn means through Pluto's nodes. Susie Underwood has mentioned that you see a difference in your nakshatras for a few planets based on Ernst software versus VIX measurements. I think Ernst uses Dhruva as galactic center. This is an area that I haven't... Susie has asked a good question. Even amongst us tropical Vedic astrologers, there's different ideas of where each nakshatra is. Really, Vic's idea of the nakshatras has to do with the actual stars, and even the stars move. As I understand it, Ernst is a bit more about dividing space into 27, the 360 degrees of a circle into 27, whereas Vic is more about the energy coming from the actual stars inside the nakshatras. He's got a video on it. Don't quote me on that, but this is me throwing stuff at you. Nicholas Boak says that Ernst uses equatorial nakshatras. I gotta ask these guys about this stuff. This is stuff I haven't considered it for a long time. To answer my question, I believe the Sumerians divided the sky into 12 parts, but weren't necessarily focused on the constellation. Gunmetal Crow says, I apologize. I missed most of the video. Did you cover how the seasons are not an explanation of tropical since they're opposite in the north and southern hemisphere? Okay, so that's a classic one. The question is, how are the seasons not an explanation of tropical? Because they're opposite in the north and south hemisphere. The best way that I often describe this is that we know where again, really, astrology, tropical zodiac astrology is based on a calendar. And this calendar shows the position of Earth, which is always set, it's angled in a certain way because it's going through the wobble. And it's angled in a way, and it is going, it's going in a way, like the angle is faced in a way, so that the northern hemisphere is going to get a certain angle from the sun, and the Earth is going around the sun. As the Earth goes around the sun, it appears from Earth's perspective that the sun is going through from the northern solstice to the southern solstice. The movement of the sun from solstice to solstice actually goes through, and this is sort of a tropical Vedic explanation of the northern and southern hemisphere thing, the sun is going through the chakras of planet Earth. When the sun goes to Capricorn from Earth's perspective on the winter solstice, we have the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere, but the northern hemisphere is still closer to the north point. North is cosmic north for planet Earth, no matter where you are. So the northern hemisphere getting winter it's almost like we're the north point of planet Earth. This, what we see as being the top here, the north celestial pole, that is what is sort of like the marker for where the sun is actually from Earth's perspective. Because as we know, there's true north, and then there's like cosmic north and east and south and west. So, Aries, for example, the beginning of Aries is considered to be east. And that is east in terms of the sun revolving, the Earth revolving around the sun, and the sun revolving around from Earth's perspective. We know that Aries is cosmic east. When the Earth is in Libra, the sun is in cosmic east Aries. That is a four-cornered cardinal directions that is different from what we call true north. And during true north, if I was to describe it, let's see, I got one picture here I think that I thought was pretty good. You'll notice that Capricorn is actually lower here. The sun is actually lower when it's in Capricorn, and the sun is higher when it's in Cancer. This is the best way that I can describe it. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to stew on this one. I knew this question would come up. By Gunmetal Crow has asked a good one. But essentially, the sun moving through these positions is what generates the idea of the zodiac signs. So it's not the seasons, because we know that the season, when the sun is in Capricorn, it's winter in the northern hemisphere, but it's summer in the southern hemisphere. But regardless of these, cosmic north is always, the true north point is always north. And so the sun is actually going through what's called the chakras of the planet Earth as it goes along. Capricorn and Aquarius are considered the root chakra. Then we have Sagittarius and Pisces on the sacral chakra. We have Aries and Scorpio on the solar plexus. We have Libra and Taurus on the heart. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? It goes Capricorn, Aquarius. It goes Aquarius at the root, then Pisces, Aries, Taurus at the heart, Gemini at the throat, Cancer at the ajna, the third eye, and then it's the same thing going down. Leo at the third eye, Virgo at the throat, Libra at the heart, Scorpio at the solar plexus, Sagittarius at the sacral chakra, then Capricorn at the root again. I've got a picture for this somewhere, but essentially that is probably the best explanation I can give for why it is always said that the zodiac still occurs in the same way, whether you are on whichever hemisphere that you're in, right? And this is the example that I was kind of, I was talking about this in my Pluto videos. Right now, during the winter solstice, well, we're not in the winter solstice anymore, but we are in Capricorn Aquarius land. So we have Aquarius at the root, and then it's Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer. That's the manifestation of material to spirit, and then we have the manifestation of creative spirit into material. Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn. This is the chakras, and this is where the sun is moving through the body of the earth And this is in large part where the energy of the zodiac comes from the cosmic cardinal points. Because remember, again, it's not about the stars, it's about the relationship of the sun to the Earth's, from Earth's perspective of cosmic east and the cosmic cardinal points. I hope that makes sense. That's my best way of describing that. That's even a hairy thing to get into. Maybe I'll have to leave that for another video. There's a lot for me to plug into here. I didn't think this astronomical theory stuff would be something that would really rev me up, but it is these days, folks. So, I think that that's a good way for us to end our podcast today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for watching. If you've been watching this after the fact, feel free to let me know some comments. I'm going to do my best to get at it. You know, this wasn't intended to be something that would be my expertise, but I'm feeling really good about it. I'm blessed to be getting this back and forth of emails from Vic Takara. So I want to hack at it now, at least for a bit, before I start going into my other stuff that I usually do. I'm a yoga guy, and I'm leaning towards starting to talk about Kriya Yoga eventually, meditation and all that stuff. But astrology has caught my interest for a long time. That's why I've been here talking about it. Top chakra was in that direction. Really, Gunmetal Crow, Cosmic North was determined. You know, North is just the north part of the planet, and the Rishis did know about that. North is this little peak part of the planet. True North, as people call it, right? The North Celestial Pole. So that is the true ideal of North, but the signs have their own idea of North as well. And as for what you're asking, the Rishis would have determined really that Earth's top chakra was at Leo and Cancer. That is the 6th chakra. But all of this, even the idea of the chakras, comes from the Tropical Zodiac, which uses the cardinal points to create itself. Really, the cardinal points of Capricorn and Cancer really more define what the Rishis used to define the chakras. So I'm glad you guys enjoyed this deep dive. Lots to think about here. Tell your friends. Tell everybody else. If they're interested in digging into the sidereal tropic debate, this has been my hack at it. And really, there's still so much to be said. All I've really tried to do here, this is supposed to be a primer, believe it or not. It is what it is. I'm going to start piecing this video together and stuff, like I said, so it's in more bite-sized pieces. But for now, this is out there. Drop some comments. Let me know what you folks think. I'm open to all suggestions about things that I should talk about. It's always just going to come from me doing my best to hack at things. And I appreciate you all being there with me as I go through it all. I've got a usual crowd here who's been hanging out with me and enjoying this. Brutus Always Mine, Not So Serious Moonlight, Amanda Landry, Gunmetal Crow, Ninja, it's cool to have you here today. My friend Capulet, Susie Underwood, Baba Jai, my friend Teresa is here hanging out with us as well. I always love having all you folks hanging out with me. And for everybody watching after the live, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll talk to you guys on the next one. Stay tuned for Tuesday. We're going to be talking with Vic, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about all this stuff before I'm probably going to get sick of it. I'm going to give it a month of just obsession, as my Scorpionic sun tends to do. Leo rising, Scorpio sun. I got Mars there in Scorpio, so I just eat it alive while it's there, and then I'm probably going to get sick of it. So enjoy it while it's here, ladies and gentlemen.